Welcome to the Rocks to Pearls, the League of Dreams podcast. I'm your host, Mike Bordick, alongside my teammate and co-host, Frank Kalarick. We're going to explore how challenges, discipline, and heart can transform ordinary moments into extraordinary success. We're going to have conversations with athletes, coaches, educators, business leaders, and others as we uncover how we can all turn the rocks of life into pearls. Well, Frank, we got a special guest today, don't we? Our superstar right here from the League of Dreams, Kelly Spanoghe. Kelly, thanks so much for coming on the show. And before we get started into some questions, you got to fill in our audience in your background because you're one of the smartest people I know. And I love talking to you about everything you've done in your professional career. Can you fill us in on where you came from, how you got your education and stuff like that?
Sure. Well, first of all, thank you for inviting me today. I appreciate the opportunity. I grew up in Connecticut, small town in Connecticut, and came to Maryland, went to the University of Maryland, and got my degree in elementary and special education. After a few years, went back to get my master's degree, and I was in a cohort at George Washington University. In getting my degree in, at that time, it was emotional disabilities. And then from there, I went on to work towards the doctorate in administrative emotional disabilities and transitioning students from least restrictive to more restrictive and vice versa for students with disabilities. I also have a certification in applied neuroscience that I got many years after when neuroscience became really a foundation in the field of education.
Well, Kelly, you have really seen education in general transform. And I think the things you're doing right now are right at the leading edge, I think, of this incredible transformation that our educational system is about to take on. And I think we're in the midst of it right now, but especially for our special needs population. What kind of got you into that? What was your motivation to pursue special needs and that type of education?
Well, it's interesting, Mike. I would consider myself a lifelong educator. I started with teaching my dolls when I was very, very young. I used to co-teach religious education with my mom when I was in middle school. And then in high school, I was an assistant dance teacher. And one of the interesting things that happened was the teacher had a new student enter, and the student was deaf. And our dance teacher asked me to take her in the back room and catch her up on the routine. And I found myself at a loss of, I don't know how to communicate with this person. I have no idea how to relate. And soon we began developing our own sense of communication. And that really intrigued me. So that was really my introduction into special education, was looking at, these neurodivergent individuals. And how do we build that connection? How do we help them become part of society? And I went on from there to do some interning and volunteering in residential treatment centers. I was a coach for Special Olympics. Any way I could get involved. And finally in college, I met a family who had two intellectually, developmentally challenged children that I started babysitting for. And I later lived with the family, and now they are my guardian children. So my whole life has really centered around this passion for helping every individual feel heard and valued and respected regardless.
Mike, I do want to bring up to our listeners here, I mean, Kelly would be what we would call in baseball a gamer. So she brings such a unique background and skill set and compassion that you don't see in a lot of people. There's the education side, there's the political side, there's the what the industry is going through. Kelly has done it all. I mean, I do, she's not just a player, but an all-star. She's been involved with our League of Dreams program for over 20 years. I think in 20 years, I've seen her in 10 different roles, right. But it's only a compliment. I say that as a compliment to her ability. as a principal, as administrator, but I've seen her on the field, and you have too, with the children and that compassion and love. And she's that gamer, Mike, of whatever it takes, she's going to do.
Oh, there ain't
totally
no doubt about
dependable. So I think that, our listeners need to know that part of Kelly also. She's very credentialed, but there's a side of her that she can apply that in a very grassroots way. And I think that's what makes her so unique and so talented. So, I'm just popping off about you, Kelly, but
thank you.
I think it's important to know. I mean, you got great credentials, but you're very down to the bare bone part of the program. And I think that's a side that I want you to share also today. I mean, you're on the field, you're in the classroom, you're in advocacy, and that's not a lot of people can do all of that. So,
and that's actually where my preference is to be with the children, to be in the classrooms, in the crisis room, in the middle of, situations. I'm not much for the executive labels, much more comfortable with the kids.
Yeah, that's for sure. We have the pictures and video to prove it. So it's great. That's really fun.
As you got into your education, I mean, what do you think now are the misconceptions that people might have with our special needs population?
Well, I think one of the things that we fail to recognize is that each individual is unique, regardless of whether they have a disability, trauma, marginalized. It doesn't matter. We're all unique. And oftentimes, youth with disabilities are defined by their disability. That becomes their label of who they are. And, a disability doesn't define the person. It just merely indicates where they may experience some challenges. In special education, we tend to work on a deficit model. We think about our disabilities as pathology. And as we look at our students with this disability, we oftentimes limit their opportunities and their experiences. They become the disability. And so what we want to look at is, how do we move from this idea of compliance, helping our students to be compliance driven, and change that for compassion and empathy, and really looking at the strengths of our children, leading with their strengths instead of harboring on their deficits or their lagging skills. We really want to provide this foundation of learning based on those special talents that they bring to the learning environment. I think one of the things in education as a whole is looking at the behavior of our children as biology. All behavior is grounded in trying to get a need met. And that's for all of us, not just our children, not just children with special needs. But that need that we're trying to get met is how we connect with others. And for children who have trauma or difficulties and challenges, oftentimes they struggle with self-regulation. And when they are non-compliant, adults tend to punish, which then deregulates their nervous system. And we see this all the time. We experience it ourselves. When we feel stressed, we become dysregulated. And so what we look at, and one of the things that we need to focus on, particularly in special education, but with all children, is that when those survival skills become activated in our children, they're not accessing that rational brain. They're acting based on a need and getting that need met. And so the stimuli in their environment then takes on this approach of determining what that behavior looks like. And when we're in survival mode, our behaviors are oftentimes incongruent with what that expectation is. And we see that all the time. We see it not only in our students, but we see it in our teachers now. Our teachers are in a very fragile state. Their mental health is being challenged every day by the trauma and the struggles that our children are bringing in the classroom. So if we can start to rethink about our assumptions of behavior of others, not just children, but even of our colleagues, and take that cognitive reappraisal from the assumption that we're manipulating, they're coercive, they're attention seeking, then we can avoid judgment and blame. And we begin to see the root cause of what's underneath those behaviors. And I think in special ed, that's a focus that we all need to take and start shifting that paradigm into a more compassionate and creative approach.
So you're in charge, you're at the top, and you can make that sort of change or adjustment. Is there one or two things, if you were ahead of the kingdom, and you could look up and say, here's what I would do first, here's what I would do second, even strategically. But I mean, and you're around people that know. But sometimes the people that know, there's a big gap between the people that know what might be good that would be good for the children, the families, the school, and who's making the decisions. So imagine if you had that ability to be able to say, here's the first thing I would do, or the second thing. Forget the cost, forget the politics, as a person, as an individual, because I know the changes you make. I know who you speak for. You speak for the people that don't have a voice out there, which is a gift that you have. But what would you do if you could change a little bit of the bigger picture in the direction?
Well, I think for me, the first thing we look at is mindset. And our mindset is based and derived on the experiences that we've had. And in education in particular, particularly if you go through educational training, what we learn is how to control students, because control and discipline are not the same thing. However, it oftentimes gets conveyed as one thought. So if I were trying to make this change, the first thing I'd work on is mindset around the underlying causes of some of the difficulties we have. And in many, many of our institutions, there are very well research-based approaches being implemented. However, they're disjointed. And so we throw out all of these approaches and hope something's going to make an impact. So the first thing I usually do with schools is I look at all of the programs that they're using, and they all have merit, but they may not be coordinated and connected to the needs of the population.
Right.
So the first thing we look at is, what is our thinking and our value around the children that we work with? And hopefully we value them as individuals. They're not objects to be manipulated. They're not numbers of a test score. They're human beings with feelings and emotions that then regulate into being available to access that higher level learning that we want to have in our classrooms.
So a real personal approach.
Mm-hmm, exactly.
Then
we really
as
take
individuals,
it down, Yep. We take it down to understanding what is the outcome we want, and then what are our beliefs and values, and how do we make sure that we're setting our children up for success. So as you both know, I'm very motivated by the research in neuroscience and looking at how our autonomic nervous system and our brain impact not only how we connect to each other, but how we understand our world and how we make sense of the learnings that are being presented in the classroom. So we begin by understanding what are the programs we want to use, but we look at them based on those values that we're interpreting. And so in order to do that, we have to have an understanding of the systems that are in place within our schools and how to orchestrate that so that we are providing a neurodiverse, affirming classroom, a trauma-informed culture. And you really have to get staff on board. You have to give them the specific strategies. You have to show by example what that looks like. And then you have to have the data that allows you to constantly review and examine your practices, find out what works, and keep it going and sustain that momentum. But if it isn't working, figure out why. Figure out what's getting in the way, what isn't working, where do we need to put our focus. But you can't make a systems change unless everybody's on board.
So do you start with a school? Do you start with the principal, the board, the administration, all on the same page, and then develop these kind of pilot programs with that philosophy and the neuroscience base, have a success, and then maybe expand it that way?
Exactly. And that's exactly what I've done throughout my entire career with program development, is I really look at the needs of the schools first.
Right.
And then figure out what the strategic plan looks like and what they're trying to reach. And then really getting everybody on the same page, making sure the teachers have the tools and the confidence they need so that they can go in and meet the needs of the students that are in the classroom.
Right. That's great. No, I love it.
Kelly, one of the first times I met you, I was really intrigued because you had a great position at an unbelievable nonprofit here in Maryland. And I don't even know if I should say the name, but anyway, when I went into this building, there were huge visuals of the brain, of just how the brain kind of worked. And I was so intrigued by that because I guess because I'm a visual learner. And it started me thinking, wow, I mean, if kids learned how their brain worked, they may be able to apply things a little bit differently. And you had explained that to me. Now, when I look at the word neuroscience, it's kind of overwhelming, but you have a great way to simplify it and put it more in layman's terms. Can you do that for our audience about how do we actually learn?
Wow, that's a big question.
Simplify it, Kelly, please.
Okay. So basically, we do teach children about the brain. And so what we look at is called Brain 101. So what are the main structures in the brain and how does that function? So we start by teaching things around this sense of neurotransmitters and the stimulation in the environment. So everything in the environment, the sights, the sounds, the smells, all of that comes into our brain, and the brain and the body have to decide how to use that information. And if it's something that the brain is familiar with, no problem. It moves on past. If, however, the brain says, I don't understand this, this is something novel and unsafe to me, the amygdala is kind of that alarm in our brain that goes off. And it starts saying, uh-oh, there's danger around. I don't know what to do with this. And that starts the brain secreting these hormones, which then determine kind of how the brain responds next. And we all know about like dopamine and how it really gets you pumped up. And cortisol is the stress hormone. And we all carry a lot of stress hormone in our bodies these days with all of the environmental causes and stimulation that happen. But we then talk about this thermostat in our brain that controls whether or not things are at equilibrium and we're ready to move around and start thinking with these new concepts, or whether things get disconnected a little bit while we figure out if this is a novel situation and we can do it. But until we get to the frontal lobe and the cortex, we have to pass through the limbic system, which is where all our feelings are. And so oftentimes in life, the limbic system is where we can get caught up because our emotions have to be regulated before we can get to our executive functions. And our executive functions are everything that we do throughout the day. So it's our ability to pay attention. It's our ability to organize, to plan, to task manage. All of those things are part of our executive functions, but our emotions need to be intact. So when you have that student that comes into your classroom, or if somebody in your household is dysregulated, they're emotional, we can't start reasoning and rationalizing with them about behavior, about outcomes. We first have to soothe the emotion before we can get to the critical thinking, the problem solving. And oftentimes we miss that step in relationships. We jump right from the dysregulated into trying to ask them to engage in rational thought, and they're not there. And so in schools, what I oftentimes teach is that, I use Bruce Perry's model of the neurosequential education model, where he says we first have to regulate the student, which means the student has to figure out, the environmental stimuli, both internally and externally. How are you feeling inside and what's going on around you? And then we have to relate to that student. Hey, how are you? Good to see you. Great you're here today. And now I can get to rational thought. And oftentimes we miss that middle step of connecting. And that connection is what we are all hardwired for. And taking time to build those connections and build those relationships is really a foundation to higher level learning.
I love that side of you and, that background. I do want to mention that a couple of years back, Kelly was doing once a week, I guess workshops, Kelly, or online, and would take each week, because it is a lot. Okay, for a couple baseball guys, that's a lot of info. I wish we knew that, Mike, when we were playing. That would have helped to figure out me a lot of how to do it. But why I was doing it, pretty more important. But Kelly did some once a week workshops, seminars, I guess, online, and broke each part of the brain down each evening. And I thought they were fabulous. So can we still find those? I mean, are they on YouTube? Was there some, place that we can find your information? I think for different listeners that might want to, continue with learning about this. I think you have a world of knowledge, but I love how you used to break it down once a week and talk about that part of the brain. It's so interesting because it's not our fault that we're doing all these things.
You're exactly right. Behavior is not intentional. It's biological.
I wish I knew that too, Mike, back in the day. But I mean, so is there a place that we can go, Kelly, to get more of this information or be able to find some of these things that you do in your world and profession? I think it'd be valuable.
I believe some of my trainings are on YouTube. That was during the pandemic when everything was kind of shut down. And so every week we would talk about the brain in really layman's terms and make it, something that people can relate to and, understand kind of underlying needs and how this impacts who we are and what we're feeling. And particularly during the pandemic where emotions were high and people felt very dysregulated. But I think you could go on YouTube and probably find them.
Yeah, I love what you did, and you broke it down, and had some nice graphics and illustrations that were very, very basic. So that was great.
Yeah, I love that stuff too, Kelly. On the biology of the brain and really the human body, when you mentioned the impact of hormones on the brain, the first thing that came to my mind was insulin. And the only reason I say insulin is because when we eat, insulin regulates the glucose distribution in our body, right? And a lot of times insulin can get out of whack just because of our diets nowadays. And that's pretty powerful hormone right there. Do the nutrients, the food we put in our body, how much does that impact how well or not well our brain actually works?
That's a great question. And research is constantly evolving around the impact of nutrition as well as sleep. And those are two areas that oftentimes get put on the wayside because we're just too busy. And I see it in the schools all the time, particularly middle and high school, where students won't eat the lunch provided or the breakfast provided. And then during the school day, they're sluggish. They're tired, they haven't slept well. And you compound that with the stressors that they carry with them. And then we have the brain that isn't getting the nutrition-rich supplements through the foods they eat. And therefore, our children aren't available for learning. And we end up providing them with these, foods that are packed with all kinds of preservatives and things that really slow our system down. Or in some cases with kids, we see so many more children nowadays with diabetes. And medical conditions that really shouldn't be affecting our youth, but the obesity rate in our country is outstanding. And it does impact so much of not only learning, but also physical activity, and how much physical movement our children engage in. One, because they're obese and it's hard to move, but they're tired. And they form this sense of lethargy around movement. And so, yes, you're right, Mike. Insulin, nutrition, sleep are all critical components to not only child development, but the development of the brain and the nervous system.
Yeah, and the cell phones don't do very much good either, I wouldn't think. Frank, you got anything else? Kelly, you're just sensational. I mean, you're so smart, well-spoken, and I hope everybody that's listening really takes heart into the information that you have, because you really are a game changer, making an impact, and we're so lucky to have you as part of the League of Dreams, yeah, and all the wonderful things you do here. So thank you so much.
Thank you. It's my pleasure.
I'm going to ask one more question, and it's really about what you see, kind of in your crystal ball with the future of your work. And I guess the other part of that is a little bit of what we've talked about. We would ask each guest, if you had a choice and your life went another path, I know it might be professional golfer. For me and Mike, it might be musician. We would probably be in a band. So just play a little along with us, and what do you see next for yourself? And then the other part, the fun part, is what would you have done if you didn't go this way?
Well, I think what my focus right now has really been on trying to resolve the tension in schools around compliance driven control, punishment theories,
right,
moving more to a trauma-informed, restorative, neuro-affirming approach, and helping educators to shift that focus from this punitive, have to control kids, to really allowing students to have a voice in school, to allow children to understand the autonomic system, their brains, and understanding, why do I feel this way? And kind of normalizing that, so then we can get to the problem solving and resolution stages to help children really feel like they make a difference in our world. So that's where my approach right now has been: take away all that punitive ways and really help children flourish, and give educators the skills that they need, the confidence that they need, and that ability to feel free to relate to kids and not worry so much around curriculum-driven focus.
Yeah.
In terms of doing something else,
who else would you be?
I don't know. I love sports.
Yeah.
I play not well, but I play lots of different sports and have as my kids were growing up. I also love cooking and baking, and
okay.
So who knows?
Yeah. Pickleball champ and
yep.
And a chef on the weekends.
Sounds good to me.
Yeah, well, we're so happy and proud that you're a part of our team with League of Dreams. You certainly have proven over 20 years, your commitment, but also what you bring to our team. And, that's what Rocks the Pearls is all about, is seeing these successes, but also the climb that you've gone through and everybody goes through. So thanks for being our guest, and we've really enjoyed making you a part of all we do.
Well, thank you. I appreciate the opportunity and love my work with the League of Dreams.
Awesome. Thanks, Kelly.
Thank you.
Well, we just saw that rose between two thorns. I'll tell you that, Frank. I mean, Kelly Spanoghe was an incredible guest. We are so fortunate to have her on the League of Dreams. And we just got the surface of her education and how really impactful she is in our special needs community.
You got it, pal. I think we had a chance to share our Kelly Spanoghe with everybody today. I mean, we've seen her with us now for about 20 years, all the different roles, all the different specialty, and just her gift that she brings all the time. And it was really special for us to be able to share that with everyone, to share Kelly with our Rocks the Pearl show. I mean, she encompasses what this is about. And she's had to come through a lot of things in her career to get where she is, and nothing would stop her. And that's what we saw today. So it was a great guest. We're very fortunate to have those people, in our team.
Well, she's so special. We didn't even talk about some of the other things that she's done within the League of Dreams. You talk about getting your hands dirty. She does swim instruction. That's one of our huge pillars is swim safety.
Yep.
She spearheads that. How about the STEM programs that we've started to launch? We got a couple of great
it goes fast.
She does all the training, man.
Well, we'll have her back. I mean, she can hit anywhere in the lineup, so we'll definitely get her back. But what a treat to have her with us today.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I just want to thank everybody for listening to Rocks the Pearls. You got to keep doing the work, that's for sure. You got to keep showing up, and you got to keep turning those rocks into pearls.